Our story begins in the South Pole, where we meet Katara and Sokka, two siblings from the Southern Water Tribe, as they are out fishing. Katara is a waterbender, although an inexperienced one. We will soon learn that that is because there are no other waterbenders left in her home to teach her, as the Fire Nation invaded a few years ago with the explicit goal of wiping out all the remaining waterbenders. Katara and Sokka lost their mother in this raid. Sokka is not a bender, but he is a snarky and more than slightly sexist jerk. It doesn't take long for the two of them to get into a fight, which is then cut short by their boat getting trapped in a strong current, crushing it between ice sheets and leaving them stranded on the floating sea ice. Sokka then makes another sexist remark, blaming Katara for the dilemma, which makes her furious, and as she yells at him, she involuntarily waterbends behind her, crushing up ice and causing another huge wave, revealing a strangely round iceberg that seemingly has something trapped in stasis. A giant animal and a young boy. This is Aang's Iceberg, a free mana enchantment that exiles a non-land permanent for as long as it remains in play. This is a fair analogy for placing something in stasis the same way as Aang is here. It also has Flash, which references how Aang actually did this to himself in a moment of desperation. We later learn that Aang encountered an unexpected storm as he was traveling, and then involuntarily used his avatar powers to save his own and his companion's life. Finally, it allows us to waterbend free, to sacrifice the enchantment, and scry too. Surprisingly, this isn't accurate to the show, even though, before checking again, I could have sworn as well that Katara used waterbending to free him. But no, Katara doesn't waterbend to free Aang. Her waterbending found him, but to free him, she simply runs up to the iceberg and smacks it with Sokka's club. A regular mana cost would have been more appropriate here. A couple of hits crack the ice, and then Aang is released alongside a giant pillar of light that rises into the air. Unconscious at first, Aang wakes up and immediately asks Katara if she wants to go penguin sledding with him. He seems fine. More than just fine, in fact, as he climbs back into the iceberg and wakes up his companion, a huge 6-footed creature that he describes as a flying bison. This is Appa. Sokka is very skeptical of this entire situation and worries that Aang might be from the Fire Nation. As the conversation continues, Aang sneezes and launches himself several meters into the air, revealing that he's an airbender. This grabs Katara's interest more than anything else so far. She's always wanted to improve her bending, but was never given the opportunity. Aang might not be a waterbender, but he might still be able to teach her. Sokka decides he's had enough of this and wants to return to their village. Unfortunately for him, he then realizes that earlier their boat was crushed and he doesn't have a way to get back. Aang offers to bring them by riding on Appa, and left with no better options, the siblings agree. Everybody climbs on board, then Aang calls out "Yip Yip," the signal he uses to tell Appa to begin flying. But Appa just jumps into the water and swims instead. Not too far away, we see a Fire Nation ship. On that ship are Zuko, Prince of the Fire Nation, his uncle Iroh, and their crew. Zuko has been hunting for the Avatar for over 2 years, and as he sees the giant light break through the sky, he concludes that it must be the Avatar. He's right, but that's mostly a coincidence, as Zuko desperately wants to find any sign of the Avatar. Iroh interprets the light as a natural phenomenon and tries to talk Zuko into getting some rest. Many have searched for the Avatar before, but none have found him. But Zuko insists that he's different, that he will find the Avatar because he needs to restore his honor. This need is depicted in Obsessive Pursuit, a 2-mana black enchantment that when it enters and at the beginning of our upkeep, we lose 1 life and create a clue token. Also, whenever we attack, we put X+1/+1 counters on target attacking creature, where X is the number of permanents we sacrifice this turn. If X is 3 or greater, the creature also gains lifelink until end of turn. The first ability is a great depiction of Zuko and his self-destructive mindset. To him, finding the Avatar is more important than his health, his life, his everything. It's the only thing on his mind, and he will keep searching, no matter the cost to himself. It's very appropriate that this enchantment doesn't have a may ability. Everything is mandatory. Zuko doesn't think his search is optional either. If the obsessive pursuit goes on long enough, it will eventually kill him. The second ability then is Zuko locking in, as he discovers the Avatar and starts tracking him. However, I don't quite like how this card ascribes sadism to Zuko, finding strength in the sacrifices he makes. Zuko and the Fire Nation are quite ruthless, and they are willing to make sacrifices. But Zuko is never shown to enjoy those sacrifices. He views them as necessary, but still an evil. That also means he has boundaries. Zuko isn't the type to sacrifice his allies. A better depiction would have been to limit the type of sacrifice to artifacts and/or lands, which would have been primarily treasure, clues, earthbending, and fetch lands. This definitely would have made the card a lot worse, but would also have been a more accurate description. We cut back to Aang, Katara, and Sokka, who have arrived at their village, which we now see to be small and devoid of men of fighting age. Women, children, and old folks are all that are left. There, Gran, Katara and Sokka's grandmother, talks to Aang and tells him that she thought airbenders were extinct, as they hadn't been seen or heard of in 100 years. Before Aang has appropriate time to process this, his staff that he had been carrying along is snatched by Sokka, who declares it to be a poor weapon. Sokka views the world entirely through the lens of war. Aang airbends it back into his hand and explains that it's not a weapon, it's meant for airbending. He begins to show it off by expanding the wings hidden inside of it and flying. This is the glider staff, which Wizard depicted in a very simple but faithful way. A 3-mana equipment that airbends when it enters and gives the equipped creature +1/+1 and flying. The conversation continues. We learn that all the warriors left the village after Fire Nation raid a couple years ago to fight at the front lines. Sokka was too young to join them at the time, but he's now the only man in the village of fighting age, and he views himself as their only protector. Sokka doesn't hold this perspective happily, and he's not exactly wrong. Aang and Katara finally go penguin sledding. This is where we get our first good look at the animals of the world of Avatar, which are for the most part combinations of two normal animals. The penguins in question are actually otter penguins, and we also get the chance to see some tiger seals. These animals are just regular animals, nothing magical about them, but animals in Avatar are often depicted to be quite intelligent. As they're playing, Aang and Katara find an abandoned Fire Nation ship that was trapped in ice during a conflict many years ago. Aang convinces Katara to explore it with him. As they do so, the conversation steers to the war again, and Aang says that he's never heard of any war and that he even has friends in the Fire Nation. This is where it becomes abundantly clear that he was trapped in that iceberg for a very long time, because 100 years ago, the Fire Nation launched an unprovoked attack on the rest of the world, which has been trapped in a never-ending war since then. It's impossible that Aang hadn't heard of it, unless he was in that iceberg for at least 100 years. This reveal greatly startles Aang. After a moment of rest, they continue exploring the ship, but unfortunately trigger a booby trap, locking them in a room and launching a flare upwards. Aang, being an airbender, has no problem escaping the ship by going through a hole in the ceiling, but the flare had attracted Zuko's attention. He uses a spyglass to view where it came from and sees Aang obviously airbending. Zuko found the Avatar.